everybody, long time no see. Welcome back to the Engine Gremlin channel. I'm sure at least a few of you have wondered where I've been these last 5-6 months, why I haven't posted any new content, been kind of silent out there. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And I'm going to give you guys a quick update on that before we get into the main part of the episode. Reason number one, my wonderful wife gave birth to our beautiful twin baby girls. However, they came 7 weeks early. Now, I'm happy to say that they are both doing wonderfully well, beautiful baby girls in great health. But that 7 weeks was time that I was planning to spend here in the garage, making some progress on the head, filming some stuff so that I had stuff that I could go and edit and push episodes out until the girls got a little bit older. Life throws curveballs. That's just the way it is. So unfortunately, that did not happen. But it's a very exciting time for me and my wife as our family is growing. So that's very exciting. The other part of it is actually with respect to my job. So some of you may or may not recall, I work in the aerospace industry. I help design and build and launch rockets with the company that I work for. And we've actually been getting ready for the maiden launch of our new rocket. So it's kind of been an all hands on deck situation at the company, getting, everybody pulling overtime and getting ready to make this launch a success. I'm happy to announce that it was actually a huge success. We managed to launch successfully on the first try and hit our target dead on. If you've never watched a rocket launch before, I highly recommend that you go check out a video of the launch. I will post a link to it down below. Really cool stuff, and it was a really exciting high point for me in my career. So that's where most of my time has been over the last 5-6 months, is not only getting ready for the launch, but taking care of the girls with my wife and sleeping a grand total of maybe 3 hours in the last 6 months. With twins, you skip the tutorials and you go straight to hard mode, man. But nevertheless, it is very exciting. It's very fun. So that's where I've been. That's why there's been no new content, no new updates. So I apologize about that, but now the girls are a little bit bigger and I'm finding myself a little bit more free time here and there to make more content and start making progress on the head again. With that being said, let's get into the main part of the episode. So today, you may notice, I got this fancy new toy here, this nice Rikon, not a sponsor, bandsaw that is just big enough to fit that 2JZ head. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to take that 2JZ head and we are going to cut it right down the middle. We might cut the end off first. I might want to keep a whole block end for myself so that I could maybe chop it up a little differently. But regardless, we're going to cut this 2JZ into multiple pieces and we're going to take a look inside. And we're going to do this for a couple of reasons. One, we want to be able to get a good look at all the interior passages, specifically the oiling passages and the cooling passages, so that those can be modeled correspondingly in the new head that we're designing and that they interface well with the Ford block. So that's the main reason. The other reason is actually with respect to the intake and outtake runners. Now, for those of you who don't know, the intake and outtake runners on the 2JZ are perfectly straight. Cool. I want to keep the bolt pattern and interfaces for the intake manifold and the headers that the 2JZ uses. I know that's going to probably rub folks the wrong way. They're probably going to want to use the intake manifold and headers that they already have on their straight six. But the reality of it is, most folks are not using a crossfill head. So they're going to need to do some tinkering. They're going to need to do some tweaking regardless. And I want to make this as off-the-shelf available as possible. And the fact is there are a ton of 2JZ parts that are designed and ready to go off the shelf. You could buy them in an hour if you wanted to, that are designed to do high power applications. We're talking 600, 800, even 1,000 horsepower. So we want to make it a bolt-on application and we want folks to have to do as little tweaking as possible. So by keeping that's really kind of the approach that we're taking. And I also know a lot of folks out there already don't have a performance head for the Ford 200. They either don't have the Australian head, the Australian crossfill head, the Argentinian head, or the vintage inlines head. There's hundreds of folks out there that are just waiting for a new performance head. So they're kind of starting from the beginning. So why not set those folks off on the right foot from the get? So for those of you who that does not apply to, I'm sorry, that's just kind of the way it is. But this was a decision that was made with not only making the easiest for the majority in mind, but also making it the most cost effective and amenable to power upgrades. So that's kind of the approach we're taking there. With that in mind, the spacing of the cylinders is not the same between the 2JZ and the 4200, which means that those the runners inside the head are going to have to start to branch out a little bit. Same thing with the exhaust. They're going to have to branch in a little bit. So in order to do that, I need to be able to split one of the cylinders right down the middle so that I can get good accurate measurements of the runners and make sure that those are modeled correctly as they go into the valves and into the cylinder. And we have a nice, good airflow that's going into there. So that's kind of the primary reason why we're going to cut it in half today. But other than that, I'm not going to really talk your ear off much more. I'm sorry, I've kind of rambled. There's a lot to get through today since I've been gone for so long. But without further ado, let's go ahead and cut up that head into a bunch of itty bitty pieces and piss off a lot of people. So that was fun. Now that I have successfully forever damned myself to car hell for committing such a sin as cutting up a 2JZ into pieces, just after a couple of minutes of looking at the pieces that I chose, learning some interesting things here. Um, so to start off with the pieces that I chose to cut off, and I'm going to cut off more, but I think these are kind of the more important parts, other than potentially the end with the VBTI. Um, just to see how that's plumbed for the oil passages. I chose the end pieces because, again, the VVTI is on the other end. And I want to make sure that my cuts are pretty specific there. I started with the long cut straight down the center because I'm not going to really learn anything from there other than, you know, how the two sides are kind of joined. So, and I'll get to that in just a second because you see that kind of W shape in the middle, and that's pretty interesting. I also wanted to see, how the geometry in the connecting pieces of metal were, what their cross section looked like. So nothing out of the ordinary, really, other than that W shape. But I'm 90% sure I figured out why after looking at one of the pieces that I cut off on the end. Let me probably getting a lot of background noise from the baby monitor, so my bad there. Sorry about that. Now, let's start with the back piece on the intake side. So there's a bit of a difference between the intake side and the exhaust side right out of the gate, and that is the intake is straight runners. They don't have to curve off. But with the exhaust, you'll notice that the exhaust, and I think I've got that piece right here. Yes, here it is. All right, so this is the back, and this is the exhaust side, and you can tell because of the plug needed for the water. So the exhaust is right there. On the exhaust side, the runners actually curve. So the runners, the further out towards the edge they go from center, the more they start to curve is what I'm noticing. And I already knew that from looking at these. But I wanted to see just exactly how much they curved because I think that's one of the main differences that I'm going to have to make in this head is getting that curve correct. With a straight bore, it doesn't really matter. I just match the bolt pattern up. No big deal. I'm still going to have to put in a little bit of curve on the intake side if I want it to be compatible with 2JZ parts, which I do because I want people to be able to turbo these engines as easily as possible. Keep in mind that these engines run perfectly fine naturally aspirated. So, yeah, getting that geometry right is going to be interesting. I think I'm still going to stand by my choice to go with. Let me pull up another piece here. Oh, you get so turned around when they're cut in half because you can't recognize anything. That's the intake. I already had the exhaust. Silly me. Oh, I cut it off center, so that's why I can't find it. Anyway, I'm standing by my decision to go with the 2JZ exhaust. They make non-turbo exhaust for the 2JZ. I know folks are going to want to reuse the exhaust headers that they have for the current 200 heads. That does suck, but because they make naturally aspirated, non-turbo, whatever you want to call it, exhaust headers for the 2JZ, it means that adapting that to your current exhaust setup is not going to be that much of a headache. Is it going to be a couple $100 out of your wallet at the end of the day to do that? Yeah, it is. But if my mindset is that if you're going to be paying for one of these heads when they're all done at the end of the day to get that 2JZ performance, that probably doesn't bother you that much. So I'm standing by that. I know that's probably going to upset some folks, but again, I'm trying to make this as cost effective as possible with off the shelf parts, and again, trying to make this as easily turboed as possible, which means using the aftermarket 2JZ parts. Because I actually have plans for a build for one of these once this head is designed to do a very high horsepower build. And in order to do that, it has to be turboed. I mean, we're talking like a 76 millimeter turbo. So that should give you, for those of you guys who know your turbos, that should give you some idea. What else did I learn? I did cut a section, the next section off from the intake, but I didn't do it dead center down the cylinder like I did the first one. Instead, what I actually did, so you can see this is where I cut it dead center down the cylinder of the first one. There's some sloppiness here from when I was trying to do that with the bandsaw, and the bandsaw just went, I'm tired. My blade's dull. So you'll have to forgive that. But you can see over here instead where I cut it between cylinders, and it's actually where one of those bridges was, because I wanted to see what the geometry in the bridge looked like, not across the lengthwise axis of the head, but the perpendicular axis, to see what the geometry looked like in there. So nothing particularly crazy. There's some overhang geometry in here that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense as a casting relic. You can kind of see it right there. I'll hook it up to the other side and see if it makes sense. Maybe there's some kind of provision there. But the main thing that I figured out looking at this piece was with respect to the water jacket. Now, I was looking at these, and you may recall that W shape here. And when I first cut it in half, I was looking at this, and I wondered what the heck these things were about. Because they already have sufficient meat here for these water passage plugs. And it's a water passage plug, so it doesn't need a whole lot of beefiness to it. So I wondered what the heck these extensions down here were all about. And the more I thought about it, the more I came to the realization that I think it's actually to help distribute the flow of the coolant throughout the head. It forces the coolant to go around and into these in-between passages and getting more evenly distributed cooling throughout the head rather than, if it's just pumping through the back, just shooting through the head. It actually forces it to go out because primarily the coolant flow is going along the length of the head. But if there's nothing impeding it, what would happen is you would have a central core of fluid going through the head that does most of the work, but the edges of the head wouldn't get very good flow. And as a consequence, they would overheat, particularly on the exhaust side. So if I'm correct, this is actually a really, oh, wrong one again. If I'm correct, this is a really slick way of forcing the coolant to go elsewhere. And what gave me the impression that this was for this was actually when I cut this piece, and you'll notice that drop down hang doesn't go all the way around. There's a gap in it, which means that if it's not all the way around, there's only two reasons for doing that. One would be for casting purposes if you're trying to get the metal to flow appropriately. And again, I am not a casting expert at all. This is just an educated guess for this first reason. But the second reason is to get more flow towards the outside. And I still lean towards that because if you look, that gap opening is in the direction of the outside of the head. Maybe it's both. I could be wrong. If somebody knows a casting engineer from on the 2JZs from back of the day, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. It could be both. Either way, that's something I'm going to want to take into account because I think it's a really clever design. The next thing that I was noticing was the oil passages. And you'll notice right here that we have the oil passage for the cam. That's another reason why I chose this cut location dead center on this particular cylinder, because I knew that there was the cam oiling passage location. And I think its reciprocal is here. Ah, yes. So there it is. Clearly see the oiling passage and then the bore hole in the back with the plug. Now you'll notice as well that there's a secondary plug on the side, which means that they're most likely sharing an oiling passage. So if I block these two up, you'll notice, yep, there's another plug, there's another oiling passage, which means that these two share a common oil supply, that it's coming down one side and then going down the other. And then, yeah, that's really all there is to it. So no need to do dual oiling passages down the length of the head, which is convenient. It's nice to know that you can just do really long boring operations. One boring operation that confused me, though, that I was looking at, and I found it when I first cut the head in half long ways, was this guy right here. It's clearly, well, maybe not clearly. Let's take a peek. It may be casting. I'm going to check the finish on it. Yeah, it's clearly been cut. So it's not a casting remnant, which means they didn't cast that like that. They drilled it out afterwards, but I haven't figured out yet what exactly that is for, because it also doesn't travel the entire length of the head. It only goes, I don't know, 2/3 of the way from the back to the front. And it's not on this side. So I'm not sure what that's about. I'm going to try and trace it back all the way and see what I can figure out. But for right now, I have no idea. But overall, I think cutting this thing up was a good success. What I also really appreciate about cutting this thing up is that from a modeling perspective, which is honestly where the bulk of my labor is going to be here moving forward, is that from in terms of modeling the cavities, I'm actually not too worried about modeling the coolant passages. What I'm actually going to be modeling primarily instead are going to be the intake runners, the exhaust runners, and then the provisions for the valves, and really just thickening those bodies and putting them, start mating them to the bulk of the body, and then shaving the rest of it away. Some of the geometry in here I probably won't take out. Maybe I will. I mean, it doesn't really seem necessary. A little extra material is going to be a little extra weight, but at the end of the day, who really cares? It's not like we're trying to make this out of billet. Now, I was thinking about material for this, and I'm almost leaning towards a cast iron head.
So I had some more time to think about this after recording this portion of the video and came to the realization that this was a terrible idea and I should be casting this head out of aluminum. My intentions were good when I was thinking about cast iron, but it was late and my judgment was a little bit blurry. My thoughts were along the lines of head durability and heat retention for naturally aspirated combustion, and I was also thinking about the cost of aluminum versus cast iron, but ultimately I came to my senses, and big thanks to Danny Stucker for making me see the error in my ways. So we're going to fast forward through the rest of this nonsense where I talk about a cast iron head.
I've been really rambling a lot here because it's late. But yeah, I'm going to keep cutting up this head a little bit more, and I'm going to get to modeling. Once I've got the bulk of the modeling done for all the angles on the valves and the runners and everything else, I'm going to start working on the cylinder dome. I tried taking a crack at that once before, and I didn't do a very good job. So I took a break from that, and then right around then the twins came. So I'm going to take another tackle at that after I've taken a crack at the rest of the stuff. And then it becomes a task of, like I said, doing the cylinder dome. I'm going to try and mimic the Polyquad design by David Vizard. Son of a gun, I'll be back. When will I learn? Ow. Ah! Anyway. Right, what was I saying? Oh yes, so I'm going to try and replicate the Polyquad design by David Vizard. The man is a genius. So obviously you have a different size valve for the intake and exhaust. But what he also did is he made a concentrated effort for a 4-valve engine to induce as much swirl into the valve as possible. You don't want tumble to get good, even combustion. So he made a lot of minor but significant modifications to induce that, starting by making 2 different sized intake valves so that you had one that was providing more air than the other and forcing it into a swirl flow. And then he also adjusted the timing between the two just slightly so that one started to open before the other and it could establish that flow, and the other one would just have to join in. And then the last thing that he did that I made note of was how he put in a little notch on one side of the valves, particularly the one that opens first, so that it starts inducing that flow into a swirl configuration sooner as well. So really, really, really clever stuff. I'm going to try and reach out to David Vizard and get his thoughts, but he might have a problem with me trying to copycat his design. I don't know. But regardless, I mean, truly ingenious stuff. And whoever it was on YouTube that suggested that, thank you for putting that into my periphery, because it was absolutely great stuff to read about and look at. So that's what I'm going to try and do. And then after that, it's going to be doing the entire valve train assembly. I'm not particularly looking forward to that and modeling up all those components and everything else, and then doing motion simulations with the pistons to make sure that there's no contact, and doing trying to decide what piston design. I'm thinking a dish design just like everybody else already has out there. The last thing I want is for somebody to have to get new piston heads in their block, because that's a full engine rebuild, which is way more money. So ixnay on that. But I'm just going to need to make sure that with the valve timing and the valve lift, and then the piston height at assuming a zero deck, which is worst case scenario, that you're not going to have any valves jamming into the piston head and getting bent and giving you a bad day. Last thing that I can think of is this guy right here. That is the cam sync sensor mount. So in case you guys were wondering what that is, that's really about all there is. But yeah, so that's the update. Appreciate you guys sticking around with me as I ramble along and kind of talk through some of this stuff and dump the thoughts out of my brain and into the camera in case I forget. Hopefully my editing takes out some of the rambling, but thanks for sticking with me while I've been gone. And hopefully I'll have some more updates here soon for you. But if I don't, just know that I'm working away when I have the time, when I'm not spending time with the girls, trying to come up with this head. So appreciate everybody's patience and appreciate everybody's enthusiasm and support. But until then, I will see you guys next time.